The gold earrings were not borrowed. This was the first thing people misunderstood about Amara, and she had long since stopped explaining herself to people who formed opinions before they finished looking. They were hers, purchased at a market in Lagos the summer she turned 22, oversized and hammered flat, and the particular weight that made you aware of your own jaw when you wore them. And she wore them the way she wore everything, with the unhurried authority of a woman who had made her peace with taking up space. She was 31. Tall and brown-skinned and unhurried in her movements, with the particular kind of stillness that made people in crowded rooms orient toward her without knowing they were doing it. She had grown up in Peckham, the daughter of a Ghanaian nurse and a Yoruba economist who had disagreed about almost everything except this, that a woman who understood herself was a woman nobody could easily move. Shin Hyun-woo had found her at an art fair in Southwark 3 years before any of this became a story worth telling. He was standing with the complete composure of a man who needed nothing from the room, which is to say, he needed everything from the room but had decided that requiring things was a private matter. 41 years old, black hair cut close and precise, a jaw that suggested opinions and the discipline to keep most of them. He had money the way certain men have weather, as an atmosphere rather than a possession, surrounding him and preceding him into every space he entered. He ran a logistics empire built across Seoul, Incheon, and 3 cities he had not yet visited, and he ran it with the particular efficiency of a man who had learned very early that sentiment was expensive and had chosen to budget it carefully. He had looked at her across the fair with the steadiness of someone who had already made a calculation and was waiting for confirmation. She looked back the way she looked at everything, fully and without concession. They had dinner 4 days later. She had known by the soup course that this was going to require her full attention. The marriage was 2 years old the first time she understood the texture of what she was inside. Not suspected, understood, the way understanding arrives in the chest before the mind has had time to assemble the vocabulary for it. She had been returning from a late dinner with a client when she came through the apartment door and heard his voice, low and clipped, from the study. And the name he said in the middle of the sentence was not a colleague's and was not said in the register of a colleague. She stood in the hallway with her coat still on and her keys in her hand, and she received the information with the complete stillness of a woman who had been told something important and was deciding what to do with it. She hung her coat, she went to the kitchen, she made herself hot water with ginger, and she sat at the island and looked at Seoul through the glass wall of the apartment, and thought with the clarity that comes when something you half knew arrives in full, so this is what we are. She called Nkechi the following morning. Nkechi Amara had been her closest friend since they were both 17, and surviving the specific endurance sport of being intelligent and black and not particularly interested in making other people comfortable about either of those things. She was compact and fast-talking and loved Amara with the complete, uncomplicated loyalty of someone who had never once made that love conditional. She arrived at the apartment within the hour, with the expression of a woman who had read the phone call before it was finished. Amara laid it out plainly, without performance or embroidery. Nkechi listened the way she always listened, without interrupting, without redirecting, without managing the shape of the conversation to spare anyone's feelings. When Amara finished, Nkechi picked up her coffee, looked her directly, and said, "You know what to do." Amara looked at the window. Nkechi leaned forward. "You have always known what to do. The only question is whether you are going to do it quietly or completely." Amara said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to understand it first, fully, before I decide anything." Nkechi nodded. She said, "Then let's understand it." And that was how it started. What she understood over the 3 months that followed was that Hyun-woo was not a man who had made one mistake in one direction. He was a man who had constructed a second life with the same precision he applied to logistics, with schedules and systems and the particular discipline of someone who treated compartmentalization as a professional competency. He was careful, he was thorough, he was very nearly perfect at it. And the only reason it was visible at all was that Amara had decided to look, and she was not a woman who looked at things incompletely. She told Nkechi everything she found, piece by piece, over evening phone calls and Saturday mornings, and one very long Tuesday where they sat in the apartment until midnight with the full map of it spread across the kitchen table in everything but paper. Nkechi received each piece the way you receive news you were already preparing yourself for, fully and without flinching. She said the right things, and she asked the right questions, and she held Amara's grief on those occasions when the grief needed somewhere to go. She was, during those 3 months, everything a best friend is supposed to be, and Amara trusted her with everything, with the details and the evidence and the plans still forming, and the fears she did not show anyone else, because Nkechi was the one person in Seoul who she was certain was entirely on her side. She was wrong about this. She would not know she was wrong for another 4 months. The unraveling began at a dinner party at a mutual friend's apartment in Mapo, the kind of gathering where the wine is good and the conversation moves quickly, and the room is small enough that sound carries farther than people remember. Amara had arrived late and found Nkechi already there, already deep in conversation with a woman named Ji-yeon, who had been Hyun-woo's assistant for 8 years and whose loyalty was to him the way gravity is loyal to the ground. Amara had greeted them and moved through the room and gone to the kitchen for a glass of water and come back through the hallway, and she had heard her own name before she registered that she was hearing it. She stopped, not because she was the kind of woman who listened at doors, but because the sentence her name appeared in had a quality she did not recognize, a flatness, a precision, that did not belong to the warmth she associated with Nkechi's voice when they were alone. She stood in the hallway and she heard Nkechi tell Ji-yeon that Amara was too proud for her own situation, that she had been filling Hyun-woo's ear with complaints about his work schedule from the first year and never understood the kind of sacrifice a man in his position was required to make, that the tension in the marriage was not external interference, but the natural consequence of a woman who had brought Lagos expectations to a Seoul life and never adjusted the gap, that she had advised Amara to leave twice already, and Amara was too stubborn or too afraid to go, and honestly, at this point, the marriage was going to fall on its own without anyone's help, but that she had perhaps encouraged certain conversations that pushed certain conclusions, and she was not ashamed of it. And then Nkechi laughed, the specific laugh of a woman who is deeply comfortable with what she is saying. Amara stood in the hallway and breathed, in through the nose, 4 counts, out through the mouth. She picked up her glass of water. She walked back into the room and she found her host and she said, with perfect composure, that she had an early morning and needed to leave. And she thanked the room and retrieved her coat and said goodbye to Nkechi with the specific warmth of a woman who had learned to act before she decided, because deciding required thinking, and she was not yet ready to think. She went home. She sat in the kitchen. She looked at the window. She thought about the word certain. She had perhaps encouraged certain conversations that pushed certain conclusions. She sat with the full weight of that sentence until 2 in the morning. Then she went to the bedroom and lay down beside her sleeping husband and looked at the ceiling and thought, with the focused clarity of a woman who has just had the room rearranged without her permission, how much have I told her, and how much of what I told her has been used against me? She did not make any decisions that week. She made observations. She began to replay certain conversations with the new key in hand and found that every locked door she had walked past for months opened on something she had not understood she was looking at. The particular questions Nkechi had asked that had seemed like care but had been extraction. The timing of certain arguments with Hyun-woo and the conversations with Nkechi that had preceded them. The specific words Hyun-woo had thrown at her in fights that she had never actually said to him directly and had only said in confidence to Nkechi. The rule that she had given Nkechi the blueprint to a house and Nkechi had been handing copies of the blueprint to someone who was looking for the loading-bearing walls. And speaking of stories that stay with you, don't forget the link to my audiobook is in the bio and in the description. Go get it right now. The recording device cost her nothing but a Tuesday afternoon and the particular courage of deciding that she was owed the truth, at whatever size it arrived in. She had purchased it quietly, a small thing, the size of a button, the kind that required no technical sophistication to operate, only the intention to press it before the conversation began. She arranged a dinner at the apartment on a Saturday. She cooked the food herself because Nkechi trusted environments where Amara had cooked, because food was intimacy, and intimacy was disarming, and she needed Nkechi to be entirely disarmed. She pressed the device on before the door opened, she set it on the counter behind the fruit bowl, and she did not look at it again for the rest of the evening.
She did not confront Nkechi that night. She was friendly and warm and attentive, and she poured the wine and asked the right questions and steered the conversation with the invisible skill of a woman who had been navigating difficult rooms since she was 17 toward the subjects she needed covered. She talked about Hyun-woo's latest business trip. She talked about a fight they had had about money. She expressed, with the precise vulnerability of a woman performing trust for an audience of one, that she was beginning to wonder if the problem in the marriage was her. She watched Nkechi's face. She watched the comfort settle into it, the specific comfort of a person who believes they are the only one holding the full picture. What Nkechi said over the next 40 minutes was not the confession of a woman who made one thoughtless mistake. It was the disclosure of a campaign, methodical and long-running, and motivated by something that had nothing to do with care for either person in the marriage, and everything to do with a jealousy so deep it had calcified into strategy. Nkechi talked about the early years, the first year, the exact moment she had decided that Amara's life in Seoul was something she could not watch from outside without intervening. Not from malice, exactly, she said, and here was the part that was genuinely chilling. Not from malice, exactly, but from the specific conviction that Amara had always had more than was fair, and that the universe occasionally required a correction. She talked about conversations she had had with Hyun-woo's circle, information she had offered, insecurities she had identified in Amara and filed, and then returned to, precisely and patiently, at the moments when the marriage was most brittle. She said with the casual certainty of a woman who believed she was still in a safe room that Amara had never understood the life she was living, and she had simply helped the story arrive at its natural conclusion faster. And then she held out her glass for more wine. Amara poured it. Her hand did not shake. She smiled. She turned back to the kitchen and stood at the counter with her back to the room and her eyes on the window, and she breathed. 4 counts in, long counts out, and she thought, with the simple clarity of a woman who had been through the worst season of her life and was still standing in her own kitchen, this might be something. I don't know yet, but this might be something. Nkechi sent a message in February. Amara read it once. She did not respond. She set her phone down and went back to the book she was reading and let the message sit on her screen until the screen went dark. Then she turned a page, and the evening went on being what it was, warm and quiet and entirely her own.
Here is what I want you to sit with before you click away. Amara did not survive this because she was cold or strategic or harder than the situation deserved. She survived it because she decided, one night in a hallway with a glass of water in her hand, that the truth was something she was owed, regardless of how it arrived. If this story found you in a specific place and you read it twice, you already know what part it was. Subscribe, hit the bell, drop your location in the comments. We are everywhere, and we are reading every single one.